Famous people who passed away in 1764. Before we proceed, please subscribe to our channel to support us. Gilbert Tennent. He was born in February 1733 and he died in July 1764. His age was 61 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Presbyterian revivalist minister in colonial America, born into a Scotch-Irish family. In Ireland, he migrated to America with his parents, studied theology, and along with Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, became one of the leaders of the evangelical revival, known as the First Great Awakening. His most famous sermon on the danger of an unconverted ministry, also known as the Nottingham Sermon, compared old-side ministers to the biblical phrases of the gospel, triggering a schism in the Presbyterian Church. William Cavendish, 4th Duke of Devonshire. He was born in June 1720 and he died in October 1764. His age was 44 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British Whig statesman and nobleman who was briefly nominal Prime Minister of the Great Britain. He was the first son of William Cavendish, 3rd Duke of Devonshire, and his wife Catherine. He is also great-great-great-great-grandfather of the King Charles III through the King's maternal great-grandmother. He served as a Prime Minister during a turbulent political period, dying at the age of 44 and 147 days. He remained the shortest-lived British Prime Minister ever. William Pulteney, 1st Earl of Bath. He was born in March 1684 and he died in July 1764. His age was 80 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English Whig politician and peer who sat in the British House of Commons from 1707 to 1742. He was raised to the peerage as the Earl of Bath by the George II of Great Britain. He is sometimes represented as having served as the First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister of Great Britain as part of the short-lived ministry in 1746, although most modern sources do not consider him to have held the office. Jean-Marie Leclerc. He was born in May 1697 and he died in October 1764. His age was 67 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was homicide. He was a French Baroque violinist and composer. He is considered to have founded the French violin school. His brothers were also musicians. He successfully drew upon all of Europe's national styles. Many suites, sonatas, and concertos survive along with his opera, while some vocal works, ballets, and other stage musics are lost. Robert Dodsley. He was born in February 1704 and he died in September 1764. His age was 61 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English bookseller, publisher, poet, playwright, and miscellaneous writer, a major publisher and poet of the 18th century. One of his first publications was Samuel Johnson's London, for which he paid 10 guineas in 1738. He published many of Johnson's works, and he suggested and helped to finance Johnson's dictionary. The Pope also made over to Dodsley his interest in his letters. Giuseppe Alessandro Forietti. He was born in January 1685 and he died in January 1764. His age was 78 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Roman Catholic cardinal, an antiquarian and philologist, and a collector of antiques whose ambitious excavations at the site of Hardane's villa at the Tivoli rewarded him with the Furiati centaurs and other Roman sculpture, renowned for his archaeological discoveries and writings. Furiati was also a bibliophile. He edited and published the the works of two of his compatriots, Gasparino and Guineforti Barzizza, and the poems of Publio Fontana. Philip York, 1st Earl of Hardwicke. He was born in December 1690 and he died in March 1764. His age was 73 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English lawyer and politician who served as Lord High Chancellor of Great Britain. He was close confidant of the Duke of Newcastle, Prime Minister between 1754 and 1756 and 1757 until 1762. He played a key role in English legal and political reforms. In 1739, he purchased Wimpole Hall, the greatest country house in Cambridgeshire. Frederick Augustus Rutowski. He was born in June 1702 and he died in March 1764. His age was 61 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Saxon field marshal who commanded Saxon forces in the siege of Pinra during the 7 Years' War, an illegitimate son of Augustus the Strong, influential in military affairs. During the First Silesian War, he commanded the Saxon troops in Bohemia and participated on the 26th November 1742 in the storming of Prague. George Parker, 2nd Earl of Macclesfield. He was born in 1697 and he died in March 1764. His age was 67 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English peer and astronomer. He was very prominent in making the case in Parliament for the Calendar Act 1750, with which the Kingdom of Great Britain and the British Empire changed from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1752, and from 1752 until his death, he was president of the Royal Society, and he made some observations on the great 1755 Lisbon earthquake. In 1755, Parker was elected a foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Mikhail Mikhailovich Golitsyn. He was born in November 1684 and he died in March 1764. His age was 79 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Russian admiral and diplomat. In 1703, he began a career in the Imperial Russian Navy. From 1708 to 1717, he studied seamanship in the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. In 1726, he became an advisor to the Board of Admiralty and was made a lieutenant commander. In 1728, he became privy councillor and senator, and in 1727, he was named president of the College of Justice. Pietro Locatelli. He was born in September 1695 and he died in March 1764. His age was 68 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an Italian Baroque composer and violinist, known for advancing violin technique and Baroque music. In 1729, he moved to Amsterdam, where he stayed until his death. He did not compose so much as previously, but gave violin lessons to amateurs and edited his and the works of other musicians, such as Giovanni Battista Martini's. His sparsely documented public and semi-public performances were open only to music lovers, not to professional musicians. Marco Benefial. He was born in April 1684 and he died in April 1764. His age was 79 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an Italian proto-neoclassical painter, mainly active in Rome. He is best known for his reputation of 18th century decorative Rococo style, preeminent in the Roman dominated by Carlo Maratta pupils. His paintings portrayed tangible human figures with complex treatment of space and luminous warm colors. Along with the altarpieces and frescoes, he also painted many portraits. He is remembered for urging a return to the classical foundations of Italian painting. Madame de Pompadour, she was born in December 1721 and she died in April 1764. Her age was 42 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was tuberculosis. She was a member of the French court. She was the official chief mistress of King Louis XV from 1745 to 1751 and remained influential as court's favorite until her death. She took charge of the king's schedule and was a valuable aide and advisor. Despite her frail health and many political enemies, she secured titles of nobility for herself and her relatives and built a network of clients and supporters. She was particularly careful not to alienate the popular queen. Johann Mattheson, he was born in September 1681 and he died in April 1764. His age was 82 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a German composer, critic, lexicographer, and music theorist. His writings on the late Baroque and early classical period were highly influential. Specifically, his biographical and theoretical works were widely disseminated and served as a source for all subsequent lexicographers and historians, a pivotal figure in the German Baroque music theory. Francesco Algarotti, he was born in December 1712 and he died in May 1764. His age was 51 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was tuberculosis. He was an Italian polymath, philosopher, poet, essayist, Anglophile, art critic, and art collector. He was a man of broad knowledge, an expert in Newtonianism, architecture, and opera. He was a friend of Frederick the Great and leading authors of his times. In 1762, he moved to Pisa, where he died. Frederick the Great, who several times had needed Algarotti for writing texts in Latin, sent in a text for a monument to his memory on the Campo Santo. Ralph Allen, he was born in 1693 and he died in June 1764. His age was 71 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a British postmaster, merchant, and philanthropist, best known for his reforms to Britain's postal system. Born in Cornwall, he moved to Bath, Somerset, to work in the municipal post office, becoming its postmaster by 1712. Allen made the system more efficient and took over contracts for the British Mail Service to cover areas of England up to the Anglo-Scottish border and into South Wales. Benito Geronimo, Feijó y Montenegro, he was born in October 1676 and he died in September 1764. His age was 89 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Spanish monk and scholar who led the Age of Enlightenment in Spain. He was an energetic popularizer, noted for encouraging scientific and empirical thought in an effort to debunk myths and superstitions. He later taught theology and philosophy at the university, where he earned a professorship in theology. He was appalled by the ignorance of his time, and his works aimed at combating the situation. Tsar Ivan VI of Russia. He was born in August 1740 and he died in July 1764. His age was 23 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was assassination. He was the Emperor of Russia from October 1740 until he was overthrown by his cousin Elizabeth Petronova in December 1741. He was only 2 months old when he was proclaimed emperor, and his mother named regent, but the throne was seized in a coup after little more than a year. Ivan and his parents were imprisoned far from the capital and spent the rest of their lives in captivity. After more than 20 years as a prisoner, Ivan was killed by his gods. Nathaniel Bliss. He was born in November 1700 and he died in September 1764. His age was 63 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an English astronomer of the 18th century, serving as a Britain's fourth astronomer royal between 1762 and 1764. Bliss studied at Oxford University and later became the Savilian Professor of Geometry. He made important meridian observations of a comet and a solar eclipse visible from Greenwich, and many of his observations proved useful in solving the longitude problem and were bought by the Board of Longitude after his death. Jean-Philippe Rameau. He was born in September 1683 and he died in September 1764. His age was 80 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was fever. He was a French composer and music theorist, regarded as one of the most important French composers and music theorists of 18th century. He replaced Jean-Baptiste Joly as the dominant composer of French opera and is also considered the leading French composer of his time for the harpsichord alongside François Couperin, a revolutionary figure in Baroque music and harmony. Emmanuel Auguste de Caillac. He was born in 1683 and he died in October 1764. His age was 81 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French naval officer who distinguished himself in several naval campaigns. Following a promotion to sub-lieutenant, he fought at Rio de Janeiro in 1711 during the War of the Spanish Succession. In 1718, he became a Knight of the Order of St. Louis. He was promoted to captain in 1738 and directed 3 campaigns in the West Indies. In 1751, following the third of those campaigns, he was promoted to Rear Admiral and made Governor-General of Saint Dominic. William Hogarth. He was born in November 1697 and he died in October 1764. His age was 66 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was aneurysm. He was an English painter, engraver, pictorial satirist, social critic, editorial cartoonist, and occasional writer on art. His work ranges from realistic portraiture to comic strip-like series of pictures called Modern Moral Subjects, and he is perhaps best known for his series A Harlot's Progress, Araic's Progress, and Marriage à la Mode. Familiarity with his work is so widespread that satirical political illustrations in this style are often referred to as Hogarthian. Christian Goldbach. He was born in March 1690 and he died in November 1764. His age was 74 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a Prussian mathematician connected with some important research mainly in numbers theory. He also studied law and took an interest in and a role in the Russian court. After traveling around Europe in his early life, he landed in Russia in 1725 as a professor at the newly founded St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences. Goldbach jointly led the academy in 1737. However, he relinquished duties in the academy in 1742 and worked in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs until his death Alexander Alexandrovich Menshikov. He was born in March 1714 and he died in November 1764. His age was 50 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was the son of Prince of Menshikov, who at one stage was betrothed to Grand Duchess Natalia Alexeyevna, a granddaughter of Peter the Great. He later served as an officer in the Russian army. In 1762, he was among the first residents notified for the accession to the throne of the Empress Catherine II. He was then elevated to the rank of General-in-Chief. He died 2 years later. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Have a nice day.